All over the world, from ancient times until the present, a timeless wisdom has been given to humanity by such great teachers as Lao-Tzu, Confucius, Zoroaster, and Christ. Other teachers, followers of those great ones, have carried on their work. In modern times, one such follower was Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. When she arrived on the shores of the United States in 1873, she had completed years of world travel and exploration. Her many years abroad had been nothing less than a spiritual pilgrimage. She had absorbed deeper ideas gleaned from such great Western thinkers as Pythagoras and Plato, and from such Eastern philosophers as the Buddha. A small band of like-minded seekers gathered around her. Among them was an attorney and gentleman correspondent from New York, Colonel Henry Steele Olcott. Together they would form the Theosophical Society. Henry Olcott was a man of many accomplishments. Born in 1832 in Orange, New Jersey, he was a distinguished officer in the Civil War and a slashing crusader against army graft. He was a member of the elite committee of 3, appointed to investigate the conspiracy that led to Abraham Lincoln's assassination. By the time he met Madame Blavatsky, he was an attorney in New York City. Helena Blavatsky was born in 1831 of a noble Russian family. As a child and teenager, she was strong-willed and impulsive. Perhaps the crucial element of her character came from the model of independence offered by her mother. As a gifted scholar and noted novelist, she was the first woman in Russia to write against the wretched position of women. Married to the Russian official Nikifor Blavatsky when she was only 17 years old, young Helena almost immediately left her husband to travel extensively through the Orient, Eastern and Western Europe, and the Americas, seeking out those experienced in esoteric knowledge. On her 20th birthday, while in London, she met her spiritual teacher, Mahatma Maurya, who would guide her in her later work with Theosophy. She studied Buddhism and Hinduism firsthand, and with the help of a Tatar shaman, is reported to have crossed the border into Tibet. In the 1850s, her adventurous spirit even brought her to the United States, where she traveled from New York to Chicago, continuing westward by covered wagon with a caravan of pioneers. Finally, in 1873, at the age of 42, Madame Blavatsky was ready to share with the world her insights gained from those marvelous adventures. One of the first things that Blavatsky did in the United States was to investigate spiritualism, interest in which was sweeping America and Europe. She went to the Eddy farmstead in Chittenden, Vermont, where remarkable phenomena were taking place. It was there that she met Colonel Olcott, reporting the events for a New York newspaper. Soon, however, their interests would go in a different direction from that of spiritualism. Blavatsky eventually made her home in New York City, where she and Olcott continued to meet regularly with others who shared their interests. Her door was open to all, recalled the colonel. The decor of the lamasery, as her apartment was called, reflected HPB's exotic style. Meetings on Egyptian symbolism, the Kabbalah, and Eastern mysteries became frequent events, and in September of 1875, a resolution was passed that a society be formed for continued study. On October 30th, 1875, bylaws for the Theosophical Society were adopted and officers were elected. Henry Olcott was the first president, while Madame Blavatsky became the corresponding secretary. On November 17th, 1875, the society officially began at New York's Mott Memorial Hall, where Colonel Olcott gave his inaugural address. The original bylaws said, "The objects of the Society are to collect and diffuse knowledge of the laws which govern the universe." Over the next 20 years, these objects were frequently revised, until a final version of 3 was decided upon in 1896. Since then, they have remained essentially unchanged. Many people joined the new society, among them the well-known inventor Thomas Edison, and the noted author and Platonic scholar Dr. Alexander Wilder. A friend of Madame Blavatsky's, Wilder helped her with the editing of her 1,300-page work, Isis Unveiled. After 3 years in New York, Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott decided to expand the Society's efforts abroad, and in late December 1878 set sail for India.
The attitude with which they came is demonstrated by that account of how Olcott, when arriving on the soil of India, bent down to worship that soil. They felt that from India had gone out a great deal of wisdom, which is even now contained in the profound teachings not only of the Hindu tradition but Buddhist, Jaina and so on. There was a spirit of tolerance as well here, of universality. India gave a place of shelter to many different people. It was in the tradition of India to try to understand different points of view, different cultures, and to synthesize them into a whole. And this, I think, is central to the work of the Theosophical Society. Perhaps all this was in their mind when they came to India and established their headquarters here.
While in India, the Colonel interested many Hindus and Buddhists in a study of the esoteric basis of their own beliefs. And Madame Blavatsky's remarkable abilities attracted the attention of some members of the British establishment in India. Together they established a new headquarters at Adyar in Madras, India. Back in the States, a co-founder of the Society, William Quan Judge, inspired by Blavatsky and Olcott's success in India, worked energetically to spread knowledge of the Society. In April 1886 he started The Path, a periodical that became the chief vehicle of Theosophy in America. In June of the same year, the General Council of the Society, under HPB and Colonel Olcott, approved Mr. Judge's request for the organization of all TS branches in America into a national section. The American section was organized on October 30th, 1886, at a convention held in Cincinnati. Mr. Judge was elected the first General Secretary and Treasurer. There were already 9 Theosophical branches in various cities throughout the United States, 7 in the East and Midwestern states, and 2 on the West Coast. One of the most prominent new members, Mr. Alexander Fullerton, described the early days of the section. "My call upon Mr. Judge showed at once the infancy and the poverty of the Society. The office of the editor of The Path and of the General Secretary was a small room opening upon a court. The rent was $15 a month. The room was so small that only 2 chairs were possible, besides the indispensable table and bookshelves." In 1893, members of the Society from Europe, India, and the United States all took part in the Parliament of the World's Religions, held at the Chicago World's Fair. The leading spirit at the Theosophical Congress was Mrs. Annie Besant, a well-known British lecturer, social reformer, scholar, and champion of women's rights. She had worked in London as a labour organiser with Herbert Burroughs in the Match Girls' strike of 1888. She reviewed The Secret Doctrine, Madame Blavatsky's best-known work for a popular British paper, and later visited HPB in her London home at 17 Lansdowne Road. It was here, after numerous travels, that Blavatsky had settled to write the major portion of The Secret Doctrine. Mrs. Besant became HPB's closest personal student. and went on to become the most prominent member of the Society after Blavatsky's death on May 8th, 1891, a day afterwards commemorated by Theosophists as White Lotus Day. Besant toured the United States often, speaking in most of the major U.S. cities within a month's time. At the Parliament, she spoke on the essential unity of all religions and of all peoples, and of humanity's relationship to karmic law. Also present at the Parliament were the distinguished and picturesque East Indians Dharmapala and Chakravarti. In the official report of the Parliament, it was written that Theosophy was pronounced to be in harmony with science and the foundation of the Old and New Testaments. Great stress was laid on the doctrine of reincarnation and the law of karma. Membership in the Society began expanding rapidly, and it appeared that the American section was destined for unhindered growth. A difficulty arose, however, that divided the Society, especially in the United States. It was a dispute of authority between William Judge and Annie Besant over the control of the esoteric school. Madame Blavatsky had founded the esoteric school in 1889 to provide training for Society members who wanted a regular practice of study, meditation and service. Before Madame Blavatsky died, she gave Besant and Judge joint control of the ES, with Mrs. Besant as head in Europe and India, and Mr. Judge as head in America. However, in November of 1894, Judge declared that he was the sole leader of the ES throughout the world, claiming that this was Madame Blavatsky's original intention. Mrs. Besant disagreed. The breach between the two widened. In Europe and India, most members sided with Mrs. Besant, while most American members followed Mr. Judge. The issue came to a head at the 9th American Convention held in Boston on April 28, 1895. Mr. Judge and his followers decided to dissolve all ties between their organization in America and the International Society at Adyar. 84 of the 102 chartered branches in America seceded from the parent society. With them went the corporate name and seal, all the records, the magazine, the path, and the property then owned by the society. Only 5 branches remained loyal to the international organization at Adyar. They were the Boise, Chicago, Minneapolis, Port Townsend, and St. Paul branches. Those lodges were recognized as the American section of the Theosophical Society, and from them has descended the present Theosophical Society in America. Mr. Judge died less than a year later, on March 21st, 1896. He was only 44. Mr. Fullerton summed up Judge's contribution to the work in America. Mr. Judge was a remarkable man, a man peculiarly fitted to be the pioneer of a movement as yet unpopular and needing both ceaseless energy and the instant seizure of every opportunity. With Colonel Olcott's approval, Alexander Fullerton was appointed General Secretary of the American section. A Princeton graduate, lawyer, and former Episcopalian minister, he began work to rebuild the section. Probably of greatest importance to the rebuilding efforts were the visits of Mrs. Annie Besant and Constance Wachtmeister, a Swedish countess who had been a companion of HPB's during the writing of The Secret Doctrine. Both Besant and Wachtmeister lectured in the United States from coast to coast. Their efforts over a 6-month period brought Theosophy to the public at large and helped establish 35 new lodges. In 1896, membership in the U.S. totaled only 281. With the dedicated help of these and other American workers, the section grew rapidly. By 1902, with 73 branches and a total of 1,703 members, the American section ranked second in size only to India. As part of the rebuilding efforts, Colonel Olcott also toured the U.S., but now in his 70s, he suffered from a weak heart and rheumatic problems. During his return trip to Adyar, He was further weakened when he fell down a ship's stairway. He completed his long journey to the place that for years now had been his real home, but died soon after, on February 17th, 1907. One of Olcott's greatest achievements, in keeping with the Society's second object, was his work to re-establish Buddhism in Southeast Asia and Ceylon, the island now called Sri Lanka. He organized the first Buddhist schools in Ceylon and obtained government grants from England such as were given to Christian schools. Today there are over 400 Buddhist institutions in Sri Lanka, and portraits of Colonel Olcott hang in many of them. Working with the Buddhist high priest Sumangala, in 1889 he helped design the Buddhist flag, now flown in some 60 countries. Colonel Olcott's body was cremated near the bank of the Adyar River. A memorial was built to mark the site. As a final tribute, a figure of the colonel was placed beside that of HPB, in the alcove of Headquarters Hall at Adyar. Present at the annual convention of 1923 was the head of the Order of the Star in the East, Jiddu Krishnamurti. Born in India, he and his younger brother were discovered by Annie Besant's colleague, C.W. Leadbeater. Seeing something special in the boy, Mrs. Annie Besant started the Order of the Star in the East to prepare members for the coming of a great spiritual message, which, it was thought, would come through Krishnamurti. As Mrs. Besant's adopted son, he was educated in England. Popular with the press, he attracted large audiences wherever he spoke. In February 1924, the Esoteric School in America purchased a new headquarters site in Ojai, California. Located on a lovely spot of a mid-valley hill, it has remained the ES headquarters to this day. Only a month later, the American section purchased a 10-acre site and started construction on a new, much larger national headquarters building in the quiet little city of Wheaton, Illinois, only 25 miles from the heart of Chicago. Greater space was needed for the management of section affairs. By the mid-1920s, membership in America had grown to more than 8,000, the highest in the section's history. A bond issue was offered to members, and a fund started to build a $250,000 structure. Members donated large sums of money, even by today's standards. Ceremonies to lay the cornerstone of the new building took place at the 40th annual convention held in 1926. More than 2,200 people attended the event, many arriving by train from Chicago. Buses were available to take members from downtown Wheaton to the headquarters site only a few miles away. Of interest to everyone was the arrival of J. Krishnamurti. The dedication and laying of the cornerstone were carried out with full co-Masonic rites. The cornerstone was laid in place covering a large copper box containing various theosophical books and documents, including a copy of the Secret Doctrine, and a permit signed by leading society dignitaries. The 80-year-old Mrs. Besant led the ritual, as members quietly looked on. After the ceremony, Mrs. Besant and Krishnamurti posed for the camera. Here comes Max Bordal. A popular lecturer from the Northwest, he visited the headquarters in India for a time and worked closely with Mrs. Besant. By 1928, staff members had completed the move to the newly constructed headquarters building. At the time, furnishings were incomplete, and the building sat on a bare piece of land. Of interest to the Society's many visitors are the pastel murals in the reception hall. Painted in 1931 by Philadelphia artist Richard Farley, they depict the unity of life through evolution. In 1929, the Theosophical World Congress was again held in the United States. Meetings took place at busy downtown Chicago's Hotel Stevens, with delegates present from Western European countries as well as from Cuba, India, and the United States. A topic of interest at the Congress was Krishnamurti's decision in August of that year to dissolve the Order of the Star in the East. Mrs. Besant summarized the event in her presidential address. He, whom many of us regard as the vehicle of the world teacher, has been carrying far and wide his message of freedom to all. He has dissolved his Order of the Star, since he looked on it as an attempt to organize spirituality, which cannot be organized. Krishnamurti continued to reach thousands of people with his message of self-reliance and self-knowledge until his death in 1986. When Mrs. Dora Kuntz was elected president in 1975, preparations were already underway for the World's Centenary Congress, which was to be held in November of that year to commemorate the founding of the Theosophical Society 100 years earlier. The week-long Congress was held in the Grand Ballroom of New York City's Statler Hilton Hotel. The theme for the World Congress was "In the Footsteps of the Founders." More than 800 members from around the world participated in the celebration. After the World Congress, Mrs. Kuntz formed an Education and Science Committee. Science seminars were held yearly at Olcott to explore ideas at the leading edge of physics and biology. These new models of the universe often blurred the boundaries that had long existed between science and spirituality, and seemed to support theosophical concepts. Guest speakers included the well-known author of the Tao of Physics, Fritjof Capra, and the biologist Rupert Sheldrake, proponent of the theory of formative causation based on the hypothesis of morphogenetic fields. Radio programming was updated by establishing the Eternal Quest and Quest radio tape series. In addition to numerous audio programs, videotape programs were produced on such topics as cycles, evolution, and the unfolding of consciousness. Also important to the work of the Society have been the Theosophical Camps, which offer members a chance to gather for study in a peaceful and beautiful environment. The 3 large Theosophical Camps are located in New York, Washington State, and Central California. And there is a smaller one in Arkansas, all of which offer workshops on theosophical and allied subjects.